Investigators are still searching for answers following the mysterious death of acting legend Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa and their dog. Officials in Santa Fe confirmed yesterday that the teams tested the stove in the couple's home as well as the water heater and the gas fireplaces. And they say they have found no significant gas or carbon monoxide leaks. The local sheriff had previously said that both Hackman and his wife tested negative for carbon monoxide. Investigators are now working to put together a timeline of the actor's final days. Preliminary analysis of his pacemaker suggests that he could have been dead for more than a week.
Tonight, we return to a case that has left investigators and the public alike searching for answers. A case that began as a quiet tragedy but has since unraveled into a series of questions, theories, and unsettling possibilities. Gene Hackman, the legendary actor known for his commanding screen presence and decades-long career, and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, a former pianist and businesswoman, were found dead in their Santa Fe home on February 26, 2025. What was initially presumed to be a natural passing has instead given way to speculation, forensic examinations, and the possibility that something far more complex was at play. Since our first report on this case, major theories have emerged. The first, natural causes and broken heart syndrome. Could Gene Hackman's passing have triggered an overwhelming physiological response in his wife, leading to her untimely demise? Medical examiners initially entertained this idea, given that stress-induced cardiomyopathy, sometimes called broken heart syndrome, has been documented in numerous cases of sudden emotional shock. The second, companion suicide. The notion that the couple may have made a mutual decision to end their lives together. Yet, conflicting details, such as the separate locations of their bodies and the lack of a clear suicide note, have cast doubts over this theory. The third, a gas leak. A detected leak near their stove raised suspicions that carbon monoxide or another hazardous gas could have silently claimed their lives. However, investigators later determined that the levels detected in the home were too low to be fatal. And the fourth, medication overdose. The discovery of prescription medications near Betsy Arakawa led to speculation about whether an accidental or even intentional overdose played a role. Yet, toxicology reports remain inconclusive, leaving this theory open-ended. But tonight, we introduce a fifth theory, one that has emerged from new forensic examinations and expert consultations. What if the real cause of death wasn't in the obvious suspects? What if it was something in the very walls of their home? A silent, unseen threat. A danger lurking beneath the surface that neither of them saw coming. Could their deaths have been caused by environmental toxins or hazards within their residence? A chemical exposure, mold toxicity, or an unknown pollutant, something that accumulated over time, taking its toll slowly, until it reached a fatal tipping point. In the next few minutes, we will explore this chilling possibility. What evidence supports this theory? Have similar cases occurred in the past? And most importantly, could something in their home have been quietly poisoning them without anyone realizing it? Stay with us as we uncover the details. The deaths of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa remain a chilling mystery. No single explanation has provided the full picture, and no official cause has been declared. Tonight, before we introduce a possible fifth theory, let's revisit the four prevailing theories that have shaped the investigation thus far. Each one has compelling points, but none have fully closed the case. 1. Natural causes and broken heart syndrome. Could this have been the simplest explanation? A tragic but natural occurrence? Some have argued that Gene Hackman, at 94 years old, could have succumbed to natural causes, perhaps a silent heart attack or a sudden stroke. The couple had been together for decades, their bond undeniable. If Hackman had passed away first, could Betsy Arakawa, in the shock and devastation of losing her lifelong partner, have suffered from what medical professionals call stress-induced cardiomyopathy? Also known as broken heart syndrome, this condition mimics a heart attack and is triggered by extreme emotional distress. It has been documented in surviving spouses, often within days or even hours of their partner's death. But there's a problem with this theory. Their bodies were discovered separately, and the timeline between their deaths remains uncertain. Could stress alone explain both their passings? Investigators weren't convinced. 2. Companion suicide. The second theory took a much darker turn. Could this have been a deliberate act? Early speculation pointed to the possibility of a joint suicide, a final decision made together. The couple had lived a long and full life, and for some, this seemed like a romantic, albeit tragic, notion. However, Evidence, or rather, the lack of it, quickly cast doubt on this idea. No note was found. No clear signs of intent. Their last known activities painted a different picture. They had upcoming medical appointments. Financial transactions showed no sudden withdrawals or preparations that might indicate a planned exit. More importantly, their bodies weren't found together. If this was a coordinated act, why weren't they side by side? Why did it seem like one had died first while the other remained alive for an unknown period? The inconsistencies raised more questions than answers, pushing this theory lower on the list of probabilities. 3. Gas leak. Then came the third theory, an environmental factor. Investigators found evidence of a gas leak near the kitchen stove, a potential silent killer. Could carbon monoxide poisoning have played a role? Carbon monoxide is odorless, tasteless, and deadly in confined spaces. Victims often fall unconscious before realizing something is wrong. If there had been a slow, continuous leak, the couple could have experienced symptoms, fatigue, dizziness, confusion, leading up to their deaths. But the forensic team determined that while a leak was present, the levels detected weren't high enough to cause fatal poisoning. At least, not immediately. Some experts raised an unsettling question. Could long-term, low-level exposure have weakened their health, making them more vulnerable to other conditions? It was a theory that couldn't be entirely dismissed. 4. Medication overdose. Then there was the discovery that led to yet another round of speculation. Prescription medication found near Betsy, Arakawa. Pills scattered near her body. It didn't take long before theories of an overdose started swirling. Had she accidentally taken too much? Was this an intentional overdose? Or was something else at play? The toxicology report became crucial. But surprisingly, initial findings didn't immediately point to a fatal overdose. That didn't mean it was ruled out entirely. Some medications, especially when mixed, can have unpredictable effects over time. There was also the question of whether Gene Hackman had taken anything before his passing. Could a shared prescription or a miscalculated dose have contributed to this tragedy? And yet, something still felt incomplete. None of these theories could explain every oddity in the case. Each one had gaps, details that didn't quite fit. So what if there was another possibility? A theory that could account for their deaths in a way no one had considered yet? What if something inside their home was silently poisoning them over time? We explore the chilling possibility of environmental toxins, a hidden danger lurking in the very walls of their residence. Could something unseen have been the real culprit all along? Let's investigate. There was no sign of forced entry, no immediate cause of death, no visible struggle, just two lifeless bodies in a quiet Santa Fe home, leaving behind more questions than answers. And now, a chilling new theory emerges, one that suggests an invisible killer might have been lurking in the very air they breathed. What if Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were victims of an environmental hazard inside their own home? A silent, creeping toxin, building up over time, weakening their bodies day after day until, finally, it claimed their lives? Let's examine the possibilities. Deadly threats hiding in plain sight. Every home holds risks, some obvious, some insidious. Investigators have now turned their attention to potential environmental hazards, unseen dangers that could have taken down two seemingly healthy individuals with no outward signs of trauma. But what could have caused their deaths? Mold exposure, the silent assassin. It starts small, a damp spot in the ceiling, a faint musty smell in the air. But certain types of mold are far more than a household nuisance. They can be lethal. Particularly, Stachybotrys chartarum, commonly known as black mold, releases mycotoxins, airborne poisons that attack the nervous system, lungs, and even the heart. Long-term exposure can cause symptoms eerily similar to poisoning: dizziness, disorientation, shortness of breath, eventually leading to respiratory failure. And here's what makes this theory unsettling. Reports indicate that Hackman had been experiencing unexplained fatigue in recent months. Friends noted that he appeared physically drained in the weeks leading up to his death. Could this have been a sign of prolonged toxic exposure? And what about Betsy? Some molds trigger severe reactions in certain individuals, including fatal anaphylactic responses. If she had a pre-existing sensitivity to mycotoxins, even a brief exposure could have been deadly. Investigators are now asking, was something growing in their home, killing them slowly before finally striking them down? But mold isn't the only invisible threat. Asbestos, a time bomb in older homes. The Hackman's residence, like many in Santa Fe, was built decades ago, back when asbestos was a common building material. For years, asbestos was used in insulation, flooring, even ceiling tiles. When undisturbed, it's harmless. But when those fibers become airborne, it's a different story. If the couple had recently been renovating, or if age had caused their walls or insulation to degrade, microscopic asbestos particles could have been released into their home. Asbestos exposure is linked to mesothelioma, a brutal form of lung cancer, as well as severe respiratory distress. The chilling question: had they unknowingly been inhaling deadly fibers for months or years? And if so, was their death slow and undetectable until it was too late? Radon gas, the invisible killer. Radon is a silent predator. It has no color, no odor, no taste, yet it is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States, responsible for thousands of deaths every year. It seeps up from the soil beneath homes, often collecting in basements or poorly ventilated spaces. And once inside, it lingers, poisoning the air. Here's the alarming part. New Mexico is known for high radon levels in certain areas. If their home had undetected radon accumulation, they could have been breathing in radioactive gas every single day. Symptoms: fatigue, persistent cough, dizziness, a slow, creeping effect on the body, weakening their lungs until, one day, it reached a fatal tipping point. Investigators are now asking, had radon turned their home into a gas chamber without them even realizing it? Carbon monoxide, the lethal gas that strikes without warning. Unlike a natural gas leak, which carries a distinctive odor, carbon monoxide is completely undetectable without a specialized alarm. It seeps into the bloodstream, silently depriving the body of oxygen. And the symptoms? They mimic everything from the flu to exhaustion. Drowsiness, confusion, shortness of breath, sudden collapse. And here's the unsettling part. The Hackmans were found in different rooms, but the timeline suggests they died within hours, possibly minutes, of each other. If a malfunctioning furnace, fireplace, or water heater had been leaking carbon monoxide into their home, they might have slowly lost consciousness, completely unaware of what was happening. Could that explain why no sign of struggle was found? No attempt to call for help? No final message left behind? And most disturbingly, did they simply drift into unconsciousness, never realizing that death was creeping in? Toxic household chemicals, a hidden threat? Sometimes, the deadliest threats aren't exotic poisons or elaborate murder plots. Sometimes, they're right under our noses. Industrial-strength pesticides, cleaning solvents, paint fumes. Even certain air fresheners contain volatile organic compounds that, in high concentrations, can cause deadly reactions. Investigators are now considering whether a recent home repair or cleaning session could have triggered acute chemical poisoning. Were the Hackmans unknowingly exposed to something toxic, something that shut down their bodies before they even knew what was happening? Or was this exposure intentional? Because one final question remains unanswered. Was this truly an accident, or something more sinister? A case that still haunts investigators. As the investigation continues, the theory of environmental poisoning remains one of the most unsettling possibilities. If true, it means that the Hackmans weren't targeted. They weren't victims of a break-in, a murder plot, or a calculated crime. They were simply two people living their lives, unaware that their home, meant to be a place of safety, was silently killing them. But if this theory holds weight, one crucial question must be answered. What exactly was in that house, and could it have been prevented? Because sometimes, the most terrifying killers aren't the ones lurking outside. They're the ones already inside, waiting, watching, and slowly taking their victims away. Investigators are now faced with a daunting task. If the theory of environmental poisoning holds any weight, they must uncover the evidence before it disappears forever. Because the truth is, time is their enemy. If an invisible toxin was responsible for the deaths of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa, it's possible that within hours, maybe even minutes, critical traces began to fade. Gas dissipates, chemical residues break down, even biological markers in the human body degrade as the clock ticks forward. Every moment lost is another step away from the truth. The only way forward is through cold, hard science. Forensic toxicology, What's hiding in their blood? Toxicology is often the final witness in unexplained deaths. It doesn't lie. It doesn't have biases. It simply reveals what's there, if anything is left to find. The first priority? Blood analysis. If Jean and Betsy inhaled toxic mold spores, mycotoxins might still be present in their bloodstream. Certain molds produce neurotoxins that interfere with brain function, leading to confusion, hallucinations, and ultimately, death. Could they have been suffering from chronic poisoning without even knowing it? And then, there's the question of gas exposure. Blood samples will be screened for carboxyhemoglobin levels, a key indicator of carbon monoxide poisoning. If their levels are abnormally high, then the case takes a chilling turn, because that would mean their deaths weren't just tragic, they were preventable. The investigators don't stop there. Hair and tissue samples are tested for radon exposure, a silent killer that leaves radioactive traces inside the body. If enough of it accumulated in their system over time, the evidence should still be there. And then comes the most unsettling possibility: chemical poisoning. If they were exposed to volatile organic compounds, like industrial solvents, pesticides, or even high concentrations of cleaning agents, their liver and kidneys would hold the key. These organs act as filters, absorbing and processing toxins. But too much exposure? They shut down. Forensic scientists will comb through every detail, every microscopic clue left behind in their bodies. But the toxicology report is only part of the puzzle. To uncover the truth, investigators must turn their attention to the scene of the deaths, the Hackman residence itself. Environmental testing. Was their home a death trap? The house that Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa once called home is no longer just a place of memories. It's now a crime scene, or perhaps the epicenter of an environmental catastrophe. Forensic specialists arrive in full gear. Air filters, surface swabs, highly sensitive instruments capable of detecting even the faintest trace of toxins. The first test? Air sampling. A specialized device is activated, drawing in the very air that may have claimed 2 lives. Scientists check for mold spores, carbon monoxide, radon, and other volatile chemicals. If the numbers come back dangerously high, then this home wasn't just dangerous. It was lethal. But it's not just the air investigators are worried about. Next, they begin surface testing. Walls, ceilings, carpets, everything is swabbed and analyzed. If black mold was present, its spores would still linger in the fibers of the home. If asbestos had crumbled into the air, microscopic particles would still cling to surfaces. Then, there's the gas detection phase. If a gas leak or carbon monoxide buildup had occurred, traces might still be found in the ventilation system. Investigators check heating units, water heaters, and even fireplaces for any signs of malfunction. But as the team works, an eerie realization sets in. What if none of these tests come back positive? What if no mold, no asbestos, no carbon monoxide, no chemical residues are found? Then the case becomes even more baffling, because that would mean one of 2 things. The environmental hazard theory is wrong, and something else is responsible for their deaths. Or worse, someone covered it up. And that leads to a much darker possibility. What if someone intentionally poisoned them and then erased the evidence? Medical history review. Did the symptoms go unnoticed? While forensic teams analyze the house, investigators turn to another source of information: the medical records of Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa. Because if environmental toxins were slowly poisoning them over time, the signs might have been there all along. Were there warnings? Records indicate that Hackman had been experiencing increasing fatigue in recent months. Some reports suggest he had occasional dizzy spells. Others say he appeared winded more often than usual. At his age, such symptoms wouldn't immediately raise red flags. But now, in hindsight, they paint a chilling picture. What if his symptoms weren't just part of aging? What if they were progressing, a gradual deterioration caused by long-term exposure to something in his own home? And what about Betsy? Medical files reveal no major health issues until recently. Close friends mention that she, too, had complained of feeling off in the weeks before her death. No major illnesses, no diagnosed conditions, just an unshakable sense that something wasn't right. Could they have both been ignoring the warning signs of environmental poisoning? Or worse, had they suspected something but dismissed it too late? The investigation's crossroads, truth or deception. As the forensic results begin to roll in, tensions rise. If the toxicology reports, air samples, and medical records align, if the evidence proves beyond doubt that an environmental hazard caused their deaths, then the case may finally have an answer. It would mean their deaths were a terrible accident, a silent killer creeping through their home, undetected until it was too late. But if no definitive evidence is found, if every test comes back negative, if every toxicological marker shows nothing unusual, then something far more sinister is at play. Because that would mean Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa didn't die from their environment. They were taken by something or someone else. And that means the real investigation is only just beginning. Similar cases of environmental hazards leading to deaths. Some deaths are loud, chaotic, impossible to ignore. Others, silent, invisible, untraceable, until it's too late. Throughout history, there have been numerous cases of individuals who perished not by a visible threat, but by something lurking in their very own homes. Could Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa have unknowingly joined the ranks of those who fell victim to the unseen killers of the environment? To understand the possibility, investigators must first look at precedent, because this has happened before. The hidden killers lurking in everyday homes. The world has witnessed multiple deaths from mold exposure, radon poisoning, and carbon monoxide, each case eerily echoing the possibility of what may have happened to Hackman and Arakawa. Some of these deaths were shocking, others went unnoticed for years, but all of them serve as a warning. The most dangerous killers don't always leave a trace. Let's start with one of the most infamous cases, one that sent shockwaves through the medical community. Case number 1, the deadly mold outbreak of Cleveland, 1994. In 1994, doctors in Cleveland, Ohio, were confronted with a terrifying mystery. Several infants were rushed to emergency rooms, their tiny bodies struggling for air. Within days, some of them died. The symptoms were unlike anything doctors had seen before: violent pulmonary hemorrhages, lungs filling with blood, suffocating them from the inside. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, launched an immediate investigation. What they found was shocking. The babies had been exposed to an extremely toxic form of black mold known as Stachybotrys chartarum. This mold thrived in damp, poorly ventilated homes, often hidden behind walls, under carpets, and within air ducts, unseen, undetected, until it was too late. But here's what made this case truly terrifying. The homes where these deaths occurred appeared perfectly normal. There were no obvious warning signs, no strange smells, no visible mold growth. To the untrained eye, these were just ordinary living spaces. And yet, within those walls, within the very air these infants breathed, a silent killer lurked. Could something similar have happened to Hackman and Arakawa? If their home had been infested with toxic mold, it could have led to neurological symptoms, respiratory failure, and even sudden death. And if that's the case, the investigators searching for clues might be walking through a crime scene made of spores. Case number 2, radon, the radioactive assassin. Not all environmental killers are biological. Some are radioactive. Every year, an estimated 21,000 people die from radon exposure in the United States alone. It's an invisible, odorless, tasteless gas that seeps up from the earth, accumulating in basements, crawl spaces, and poorly ventilated homes. Most people who inhale radon don't even realize it. There are no immediate symptoms, no warning signs, but over time, radon damages lung tissue at a cellular level, mutating DNA and triggering lung cancer in its victims. One of the most chilling cases involved a Pennsylvania man named Stanley Watrous. Watrous was an ordinary nuclear engineer, living in a seemingly safe suburban home with his family. But one day, when he walked into work, something alarming happened. The radiation detectors at the nuclear plant went off, but there was no radioactive leak at the facility. The radiation was coming from him. His home had unknowingly become a death trap. The radon levels in his basement were over 1,000 times the safe limit, making it one of the most contaminated homes ever recorded. Had Watrous not worked in a nuclear plant, where the radiation was detected by sheer chance, he and his family might have died without ever knowing why. Now, investigators must consider, did Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's home contain dangerous levels of radon? If so, the effects could have been slow and gradual, or, in a high enough concentration, devastatingly quick. Case number 3, carbon monoxide, the silent killer. Some environmental killers don't take years to claim their victims. Some do it in mere hours. Carbon monoxide, CO, is one of the most infamous silent killers in history. It's colorless, odorless, completely undetectable without specialized sensors. And when it invades a home, it doesn't leave survivors. One of the most heartbreaking cases happened in 1968 when 4 members of a Chicago family were found dead in their home. At first, police suspected foul play until forensic investigators made a chilling discovery. Their furnace had malfunctioned, slowly filling the house with carbon monoxide gas while they slept. They never woke up. This tragedy isn't an isolated case. Every year, over 400 Americans die from accidental CO poisoning, often in their own homes. Could Hackman and Arakawa have succumbed to the same fate? Carbon monoxide poisoning causes headaches, confusion, dizziness, symptoms that could be mistaken for a simple flu. But if exposure continues, victims lose consciousness. Their breathing slows, their bodies shut down, and just like that, they slip away. Final questions. Could this have happened to Hackman and Arakawa? The cases of toxic mold, radon poisoning, and carbon monoxide deaths paint a grim picture. These environmental hazards have taken countless lives, quietly, mercilessly. The question now is, did history repeat itself? Investigators will need to analyze every inch of the Hackman residence. Test the air, swab the walls, check the heating systems, because if they don't find answers soon, the truth might disappear forever. And if there's no environmental cause, then that leaves only one possibility. Hackman and Arakawa didn't die by accident. They were killed. Challenges to proving this theory. Proving a murder is difficult. Proving an invisible murder? Nearly impossible. If Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were exposed to lethal environmental toxins, investigators face a daunting challenge in proving it. Why? Because the evidence may have already disappeared. Unlike a gunshot wound, a stab mark, or even poison that lingers in the bloodstream, environmental toxins often leave behind no visible trace. And even when traces do remain, time is their greatest eraser. Let's break it down. Obstacle number 1, the corrosive power of time. Time is the enemy of forensic science. From the moment Hackman and Arakawa took their final breaths, their bodies began breaking down. In forensic investigations, toxicology tests are most accurate within the first 24 to 48 hours after death. Beyond that, the body changes. Cells decay, tissues break down, chemicals metabolize. If days, maybe even weeks, passed before their bodies were examined, critical evidence of toxins may have already vanished. Take carbon monoxide poisoning, for example. In fresh cases, the telltale sign is cherry red skin, a result of carboxyhemoglobin building up in the blood. But if decomposition has progressed, that signature fades. Blood becomes unreliable, tissue samples degrade, and the cause of death becomes increasingly difficult to determine. Even in cases of radon exposure, prolonged decomposition can obscure the genetic mutations it causes in lung tissue. By the time forensic pathologists get their hands on the evidence, it might be too late to prove anything. Obstacle number 2, the lack of prior complaints. One of the biggest red flags in environmental poisoning cases is a pattern of symptoms leading up to death. In most documented cases of mold toxicity, radon exposure, or carbon monoxide poisoning, victims experience early warning signs. Chronic headaches, difficulty breathing, unexplained fatigue, dizziness, or nausea. If Hackman and Arakawa were suffering from environmental poisoning, logic suggests they would have noticed something. Maybe persistent coughs, strange smells, fatigue beyond normal aging. Something would have raised concern. But so far, there's no evidence that they ever sought medical attention for these issues. No doctor visits, no complaints to friends or family, no signs that they suspected anything was wrong. Could they have been feeling sick but ignored the warning signs? Possibly. Or could they have succumbed to something else entirely? Obstacle number 3, the nature of silent killers. Environmental toxins are not like typical poisons. They don't always leave a clear chemical fingerprint. If a person is poisoned with cyanide or arsenic, their organs preserve the evidence. Even years after death, forensic toxicologists can extract samples and prove poisoning occurred. But mold spores, radon exposure, carbon monoxide inhalation, they don't work the same way. Take toxic mold exposure. Unlike traditional poisons, mold toxins don't show up in blood tests after death. If no one tested Hackman and Arakawa while they were alive, there's no straightforward way to detect it now. And radon? It doesn't kill instantly. It mutates cells slowly, causing cancer over months or years. If they had radon poisoning, it wouldn't be obvious unless extensive tissue sampling was done on their lungs. Carbon monoxide is the only toxin that might still be detectable if their bodies were found early enough. But if they weren't, then forensic experts are left with only speculation. And speculation? That doesn't hold up in court. Final challenge. Without proof, there's no case. Even if investigators strongly suspect environmental poisoning, they need hard evidence. A toxicology report must show clear traces of exposure. Environmental tests must detect high levels of contaminants. The home itself must be examined for a credible source. A broken furnace, mold growth, or radon levels beyond the danger threshold. Without concrete proof, there is no case, no charges, no arrests, no closure. And in the absence of a clear environmental cause, investigators may be forced to ask the most chilling question of all. If they didn't die from environmental poisoning, then what? Or who killed them? The investigation into the deaths of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa has uncovered unsettling possibilities. Possibilities that extend far beyond their home, far beyond this single case. Was their passing the result of a silent, invisible killer lurking in the very walls meant to protect them? If toxic mold, radon, or carbon monoxide were at play, this case would not just be a tragic accident, it would be a warning. A reminder that our homes, our sanctuaries, can sometimes become our greatest threats. Could Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa have unknowingly been breathing in danger? Could an undetected hazard have claimed their lives without a single warning sign? Or is there another, far more sinister explanation that remains hidden beneath the surface? The weight of uncertainty. Environmental poisoning is a difficult theory to prove. The evidence is elusive. The signs can be misinterpreted. And time, the most crucial factor in solving forensic mysteries, may have already erased the truth. But what if we're looking in the wrong place? What if their deaths weren't caused by a slow, creeping environmental hazard, but by something or someone far more intentional? That's the uncomfortable reality of unsolved cases. For every question answered, 10 more emerge. We may never know the full truth behind what happened to Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa. But one thing is certain, unexplained deaths demand answers. Do you believe this theory is plausible? Or do you think there's something else that investigators might have overlooked? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this investigation insightful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more deep dive reports. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update on real-life crimes.